Thank you, Malik. Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. It's a real honor thinking about all of the previous presenters that have been here and all of the great things that they do. So my name is Camila. I am a barista, a retail manager, and a senior coffee educator for Panther Coffee. I see a lot of familiar faces here, a lot of the regulars that go to Panther, and it means so much to see you here today. So I was born in Cuba and raised in Miami, so probably very similar to a lot of you who are locals. I've been drinking coffee for about as long as I can remember. My mom used to wake me up with a bottle of café con leche every single morning until I was 12, which is kind of embarrassing, but I had a very Miami perspective of coffee. I drank a lot of Bustelo. I thought that drinking anything else was kind of betrayal to my roots, and finally, when I started to work in coffee, I started to learn about all of the production and all of the steps that come before actually that cup. So today we're going to discuss a little bit about that. And usually within the industry, we start off at the farm and the plant, and we work our way into the product, the beverage. But today, I kind of want to start on the opposite spectrum, something that you might be a little bit more familiar with, your cup of coffee, and sort of peel back the hidden layers that make that cup of coffee possible. How do I, yeah, I have no idea how to. I'm happy to do it, thank you. Awesome, so Panther Coffee. This is one of the first pictures of Joel and Letitia in front of the store. I took it, one of my favorite coffee places to go to, and definitely my favorite coffee company. So it was here where I was able to really explore the sequence of coffee. And it all began, first, we get into the bar and we have to learn how do we make a cup of coffee. And my idea of what it takes was totally shallow. So a lot of you tried the coffee today. It's our Sencoic from Colombia. It's from the Cauca region, which happens to be the region in Colombia that has the most indigenous population. So it's actually a group of 378 indigenous members that work really diligently to produce this excellent coffee. And we brewed it two ways for you. We have the hot brew and also cold brew. And one of the most interesting things that I realized was that you can take the same coffee that has a certain profile, and depending on how you brew it, different aspects of that profile or different characteristics are going to shine through. So if you tried the coffee today, it's a rather high-grown coffee. It grows at about 1,600 to 2,000 meters above sea level. So you're going to have a little bit of a brighter notes and perfumey, flowery juiciness that you might have gotten in the beginning, and then it sort of smooths out to a little caramel and cinnamony. But if you try the cold brew, which is the same exact coffee, just brewed at room temperature water for 9 hours, it kind of flips the profile, and you get a lot of the caramel notes in the beginning, and then it kind of gets supported by the fruity notes. So the first time that I started to learn about manual brew methods, this is actually a chart that I drew for my sister, because she was like, what do you mean there's different brewing methods? And so I was trying to explain how each one shows a different side of the coffee. And that was just like a totally new thing. So we work really diligently. We have to measure exactly to the gram to how much coffee we're going to add to the brewer, and how long we're going to let the water interact with the coffee for, and if we're going to agitate it, or when is too much agitation. And we really work with every single variable to see how it changes the cup and see what's the best light that we can show this coffee under each one of those brewing methods. So if you've been to Panther, you might have ordered a clever. We will taste different roast dates, different grind settings, and that whole, how many things we can change that are within our hands, within our possibilities of representing this coffee is a huge thing, you know? It's very easy to mess up a cup of coffee. It takes a lot of effort to really maintain the same consistent cup throughout. So then we have espresso, which is another brewing method. My definition of espresso prior to working in coffee was very different. Then I realized it's just a way to brew coffee under extreme amount of pressure. It's about 9 times the pressure that we feel in this atmosphere, or about 400 pounds or through this little tiny basket. And it basically just exaggerates the coffee profile. So you can brew any coffee through espresso, but there's some coffees that are a little bit more balanced that will give you a very balanced espresso. Or if you have a coffee that's very bright, it might just taste like biting into a lemon, which isn't exactly what a lot of people want in the morning. And that really depends on the coffee and the roast. So at Panther, is there any way to zoom out a little bit of this one? But it was really awesome to work right next to the roasting process, because roasting is what translates the material that's in the coffee seed into sugars that are accessible to our palate. So basically, we use hot air. So it's almost like popping popcorn, and the coffee actually physically pops. And each roast is a time temperature curve. And depending on how much time you spend and what certain temperature, you're going to develop these sugars differently. And all of these series of chemical reactions take place, and aromatics start to open up. And it's really interesting. With one coffee, you can roast it a little bit differently for brewing or for espresso. And every individual coffee requires a very specific curve. So learning about that and how much coffee changes in the roast is really great. And so basically, coffee comes from a plant, which was very new to me 6 years ago. And it's the seed of the fruit of the plant. And there's actually 2 seeds in every coffee fruit. And because it's a plant material, it has all of these carbohydrates and sugars. And so the roasting starts to caramelize these sugars and elongate the sugar chains. Similar to cooking onions, right? Can you imagine biting into a raw onion and what that flavor experience tastes like? And then after you've kind of caramelized them, how much sweeter and more delicious to our palates that is. But there's a limit, right? We don't want to char the onions. We don't want to start tasting the cooking. So it's very limited into, you really want to develop as many sugars as possible, but you don't want to then start toasting it so where you're not tasting what the coffee had to offer anymore. But that's not really possible without great coffee. So basically, each step is limited by the quality that they receive the coffee in. So, you know, if the roaster can't roast excellent quality coffee without starting with a quality material. We can't make the coffee better, but we can definitely make it worse. So the point is to really try to preserve all of the hard work that happens along the line. So we'll go back to discussing how coffee is a plant. It takes about 4 years to grow a coffee tree before it starts flowering, and then it starts fruiting. And within the seed, as you can see here, you have multiple layers. You have the skin, and then you have what's called a mucilage, or baba, they call it in Spanish. And then a couple more layers, a parchment, a hard layer protecting the seeds, and then silver skin, and then you finally have those coffee beans. So I want to talk about a producer that's really dear to our hearts, Maximo Ramos, and the coffee is from Kailash Coffee Mountain in Nicaragua. It's in Nueva Segovia, which is a department that is the most northern part of Nicaragua, bordering Honduras. And this area is called Kailash Coffee Mountain. Maximo named it after the sacred Mount Kailash in Tibet. And basically, he bought this land in 2011 that was previously abandoned. So no coffee had ever been grown on it. And so the soil was incredibly rich with minerals. And this is important because the plant pulls those minerals to create this beautiful fruit. And what comes out of the ground is directly related to how the ground starts. So the soil has all of these excellent nutrients, and he doesn't need to add anything on. So he's really committed to maintaining that pristine ecological balance that already exists on his soils. So the plant physically, right, pulls all of these nutrients from the soil and uses it to create this ripe coffee fruit. So we can see on this, in this photo, on one branch, there's a lot of ripe cherries, but there's also a lot of green cherries. And it's super important when picking coffee, you only want the ripe ones. So that's pretty much like a huge determinant of whether you're going to have coffee that's really sweet and delicious and developed, or coffee that doesn't really have those notes, or maybe an underdeveloped coffee kind of tastes like metallic. Think about biting into a banana before it's ripe and how different that experience is to when it's fully ripened, and then how different that becomes to when it's overripe. It's almost like too sweet. So it's the same thing with coffee. The moment that you pick that cherry, that's going to translate directly into what your cup tastes like. So Maximo's team passes through his farm 6 or 7 times at harvest to only hand select the most ripe beans on that plant. And immediately after picking, those cherries have to be processed because the longer they spend in one bag, they might start to spoil, or have a bag of bananas, same thing, right? It really starts to speeden up the process. So the coffee is depulped so that the skin is taken off, and it's still covered in this sort of gooey mucilage, which needs to be removed so that drying can happen in a smoother flow. So this mucilage is kind of like all of these sugars and enzymes, and the coffee is taken to these big tanks of water. And it sits in the water, and all of these natural reactions start to happen, and the mucilage starts to get broken down. And then they're put through these cascades of like water channels, and all the turbulence of streaming downwards starts to remove the mucilage from the beans. And then it's left in its parchment. And then that's when coffee can go to dry. So in each one of these steps, it's so easy to mess up. If the coffee doesn't go in those tanks for long enough, not enough mucilage has broken down, that can lead to some microbial population starting to grow on the coffee. If at drying, this is one way to dry coffee, it's a patio drying on the floor. If they're not raked and turned over enough, they won't dry evenly. Or if it rains, then they have to be covered immediately. All the humidity levels really start to affect everything. So it really, when you start thinking about all the different steps that take into making that cup of coffee, it's a little bit overwhelming. And as a barista, you have this sense of responsibility to really try to maintain it, because by the time it reaches you, it's gone through all of that. And everyone has made sure that this coffee has kind of maintained its quality. So the job becomes a little bit more significant. You can also dry coffee on raised beds. This is done a lot in African countries like Ethiopia and Rwanda that are huge coffee producers. Basically, you raise the coffee and allow airflow to stream through for a little bit even drying. You still want to sort of move it around, but you get a lot more evenness. This is coffee drying on a raised covered bed. This is very popular in Colombia. You see the mesh material that the coffee is sitting on, allowing for that circulation. This is actually about 8 feet above the ground. And then it's covered by these parabolic tarps that allows sunlight to diffuse to dry the coffee a little more evenly instead of directly. And also, the ends of the tunnels can control airflow, and so the drying is a little bit more controlled in these situations. This is similar to how Maximo dries his coffee at Kailash. And you can see here the coffee is still in its parchment. So the little broken bean right there, I really like this picture because it shows that there's all of these layers to get to that final coffee. After coffee is dried, it goes to the dry mill to remove that parchment. And you want to get coffee to about 11 to 13% humidity levels. And the farmers are really cool. They're super old school. They just grab the coffee and kind of like crunch it in their hands. They're super strong. And based on how much it breaks, they can tell what the humidity level is in the coffee. And to reach that humidity level is really important because for transport, you want to remove as much water as possible without sacrificing over drying the coffee. And from there, it goes to the dry mill, and it reaches us at Panther, and now we've kind of completed that circle throughout. This is me, the first time being on a mountain ever when Joel and Letitia took me to Colombia. It was super awesome. I'm from Miami, right? So like I don't get mountains. But it was really cool to see coffee plants and smell their flowers. It kind of smells like jasmine, very, very sweet and beautiful. And the coffee fruit is really tasty too. It's like tart and a little gooey, that mucilage. So thinking about all of these sides of coffee, or this sequence that coffee goes through, and even applicable to the food that we eat and knowing where it comes from, it really intensifies how important it is to know all of these steps, and it makes that product that much more valuable, and it makes the job much more valuable. And it applies to not just what happens at the store, but then in life, I'm like, I gotta do everything the right way and make sure to maintain quality, and it's super inspirational, and that's sort of what made me fall in love with coffee. The coffee industry is huge. It's globally one of the most traded commodities in the world. There's rumor that it beat oil to the #1 traded commodity this year. And specialty coffee, which is basically this segment of coffee production that takes all of this care that we've spoken about today into the production and making sure that each step along the way quality is maintained. It's a very small, small, small pie piece of the entire chart. So for me, it's really inspiring if more people start to pay attention to all of these steps and care about their job. The potential for growth is huge. And even at the shop, the difference between extractions of coffees that really have had this care throughout the way and coffees that haven't, it's so apparent. And when we start to taste the difference in products and know why those differences occurred, to me it's a no-brainer, right? Like doing things right really gives a lot of more quality to things. So sometimes we don't know all of these hidden backstories, and all it takes is looking at something a little bit different and trying to find out, and sometimes it changes your life. So thank you.